recorded.
So welcome again to everyone who is in the room today for our shared mobility workshop, and those who are also on the webinar. We have close to 20 people, I believe, on the webinar. But for those in the room, I want to thank you for soldiering through the great one-inch snowfall of 2019. It's a complicated morning, so we appreciate you being here. My name is Jerry Bogas. I'm the planning director here at NYMTC. I just want to point out a couple of people who were here who seated this group. Deb Wilson is right over here. She's my counterpart for the technical side and the administrative side. And of course, Shane Kahn here, who's hiding in the corner. He's our manager for regional planning, and he does a lot of work supporting the network. So we also have folks here from our public involvement consultants. I just want to ask them to introduce themselves because they will be playing roles in this workshop. So, Jessica. Okay.
My name is Brian Wall.
And Maura?
And I'm Maura Fitzpatrick. Hi.
Okay. We will be using an interactive platform today called Poll Everywhere. And the reason for this is twofold, or threefold actually. One is that we're going to have feedback in the room, but we're also going to have feedback from the webinar, since this is an attempt to gather everyone from the region to discuss this topic. So the folks who are on the webinar need to have access to the feedback that we're gathering today and the input that we're gathering today. The second is that this is going to help us to record what you're telling us today. And we're going to get, the third part is we're going to get instant feedback from what you're doing. So Ryan, in a minute, is going to go through how that's all going to work today. And this is the first time we're using something like this for a full workshop. So we're excited to see how the technology works. And Ryan will also explain if people in the room don't have a phone or can't operate their phone properly, that we have an option for that. And for people on the webinar, in a similar situation, we have an option for that. So this is the third in a series of workshops. We held a workshop in September as part of Long Island Mobility Week. Thank you, Rosemary, for that. We held another workshop in November as part of the Mobility Advisory Forum session up in White Plains. And now we're here, but this is intended to be more regional in that we have the webinar accompanying so that people can attend remotely. And as we go through the slides, you'll see what we're trying to develop here in terms of this whole area of shared mobility and what types of regional planning should be underway or undertaken in the future to address this area of shared mobility. I do want to point out some housekeeping for the folks in the room. If there's an emergency, we will leave through the door we came in and out in the vestibule, the same door that we came in, but you'll be making a left through the side door and out into the hallway. The stairwell is about halfway down the hallway on the left-hand side. You know the staff that's here, so if you need any assistance as you're leaving, you can seek out one of us. We'll be leaving very quickly. Also, if you need restrooms, you'll need to go back through the reception area. There are codes there, and you'll get directions to the restrooms from the main desk. And we do have materials at the sign-in table. I just want to make a plug that we're trying to get rid of copies of our annual report this year, which for the topic is actually relevant to this workshop. It's the future of mobility. So please pick those up and take them with you because we have to get rid of them. Thank you. All right, so what I want to do is get started. I'm going to move out from behind the podium for now, and we're going to give you some contextual slides first to kind of set up what we're trying to do, and then we're going to get into the interactive portion, which will involve you using your phones. So let's start, though, talking about this section and what it's being done for. First of all, there's a body called the Metropolitan Mobility Network. It was originally created by NYMTC back in the late 1990s, but went through several years of inactivity, and now has been revived and reestablished in 2018 in conjunction with the Metropolitan Area Planning Forum, which is a consortium of MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and councils of government in the multi-state region surrounding New York City. So I think most of you here may know that NYMTC covers the core of the region, basically 10 counties, if you count the 5 boroughs of New York City, as well as Nassau and Suffolk on Long Island, and 3 counties in the lower Hudson Valley. So that's our planning area. That's what our organization covers in terms of bringing federal dollars into our region. Our membership includes 5 suburban county executives, 2 New York City commissioners from city planning and city DOT, the state transportation commissioner, the CEO of the MTA. Those are our voting members. We have a number of advisory members, including the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, who's represented today, as well as New Jersey Transit and NYMTC, which is the Metropolitan Planning organization on the other side of the Hudson in northern New Jersey, New York City DEC, and then 3 oversight agencies on the federal side, including US EPA. So these regional councils exist all throughout the country. They're required to bring in federal dollars into a metropolitan area. There are over 400, and this is the way NYMTC is structured here. But NYMTC is not alone in this metropolitan region. We have a very complicated region stretching out over 4 states. And that's the purpose of the Metropolitan Area Planning, or MAP form, is to cover as much of that area as possible. There are 9 MPOs or COGs that are currently members of the MAP forum, stretching from eastern Pennsylvania, the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, out to just beyond New Haven, Connecticut, River Cog, the lower Connecticut River Valley. So the MAP forum meets annually, actually twice a year, and there's regular contact between the staffs of these organizations to look at larger regional issues. And certainly any types of regional planning on issues like shared mobility is not just for the NYMTC portion of the region, but absolutely for as much of the regions we can capture. And the MAP forum is a key recipient of the information that you're going to be sharing with us today. So in terms of the Metropolitan Mobility Network itself, which is an advisory group to these 2 permanent bodies, it consists of the staffs of the member agencies and the MPOs and COGs that are involved in transportation system management and operations, or TSMO. That's a very broad term. It involves lots of different things. But it also brings in public agencies or councils who are not members of either NYMTC or the MAP forum, nonprofit organizations who provide services related to TSMO, for-profit companies who again provide services related to TSMO, and national or local research and planning organizations. So, these other parts are brought in as needed and are welcome in the forum to discuss all aspects of transportation systems management and operations. But they're not necessarily members of the network in the same sense as the staffs of the organizations that make up the network. So in this fashion, we bring in a lot of different perspectives from across the larger metropolitan region, and we talk to a lot of different people who are involved in different aspects of TSMO, and that's been a very powerful thing because this is a growing area. The network's purpose basically is to advise both NYMTC and the MAP forum on issues related to TSMO, and this is important for funding, among other things, and for regional policies. This advisement helps us to fashion funding for programs that are either demand management or systems management, projects that do similar things, and to try to get that as uniformly as possible across this larger region. It includes transportation demand management, active transportation demand management, integrated corridor management and ITS, as well as mobility management, which is a broad term that includes shared mobility, mobility on demand, and mobility as a service. And all these things overlap in various ways, and that's one of the reasons why we're having these discussions, is to try to hone in on the different elements of shared mobility that should be in a regional planning vision for the entire region. I want to point out that mobility management also, as a term, is not simply for transportation, but also for specialized transportation. So mobility management is very important for services that serve the disabled, the aging populations, so on and so forth. And it's important to think of mobility management in that broad term. And we're reminded of that as we go through these workshops, that it's more than just transportation to and from transit or transportation to and from a job. It's a much broader area. So why are we doing this regional workshop series? Well, the network is interested, as it's been meeting, in developing this regional planning vision. And the network wants that vision to inform the regional planning of NYMTC and the MAP forum members. Because these organizations have to regularly produce regional transportation plans, and those plans guide the investment of federal funding in not only transportation projects, but transportation programs and activities. So it's really important that this topic be properly injected into these various planning processes so that appropriate funding can be made available beyond what's already being made available for these important services. And why is this important right now? Well, the network identified a number of reasons. You see them here. Shared mobility has developed and will continue to develop at a rapid pace. That's in, the network members feel that that's a given. There needs to be greater awareness of the opportunities presented by the development of shared mobility. Solving transportation problems and redefining needs with developing technologies is an important imperative for all the agencies that have jurisdiction over transportation. But if you look at the upper right of the second column, it is the case that municipalities, states, and transportation agencies have often been caught off guard by the rapid development of technology that affects shared mobility. And integrated approaches are needed to plan for and manage shared mobility as it develops. And finally, shared mobility isn't fully accommodated. Thank you. Shared mobility isn't fully accommodated in the overall transportation planning process. Parts of it are, it's kind of piecemeal, and one of the objectives here is to try to create a more comprehensive approach to this overall topic of shared mobility. So now, we hope that these forums will address these areas as we explore them, as we explore your ideas, your thoughts, your concepts. First of all, perceptions of the shared mobility service itself and any information gaps that exist for people who would like to use shared mobility services. Ideas and suggestions about future improvements and investments for shared mobility, very, very important. And then perceptions of the likely speed of future development and the profitability and sustainability of shared mobility services. We're trying to mine these areas and trying to get a good sense of how quickly do people think this is developing. Is there a lot of additional development that's yet to happen? And, some of these services, there are issues with their sustainability in the long term. We want to hear your opinions about that. Okay? So we will be using an interactive system today, and Ryan's going to get up and talk about that and run through the various options we have for that use. Ryan?
Sure. Good morning. As I mentioned in the introduction, my name is Ryan Walsh. I work for FHI, providing NYMTC with consultant services for public engagement. As Jerry's mentioned several times, we're going to be using an interactive polling tool. So this is one of those rare meetings where we're now going to ask you to take out your phones, look at the devices in front of you, open up a browser and navigate to pollev.com/NYMTC. You can alternatively text NYMTC to the number 22333 and initiate the polling that way. For those in the room, if you don't have a device or are having trouble, you can come see me at this table. We have a limited number of iPads that we can lend out, or you can share your input and I can input it at the laptop. For those who are participating via WebEx, you can just open a browser window and navigate to pollev.com/NYMTC and participate that way. If you have any trouble on the WebEx, you can use the chat pod feature to provide your input and let us know. And with that, we'll advance to the next slide. This is simplified instructions, and these instructions will appear at the top of all of the polling slides. So if for some reason you get disconnected and need to know how to get back, just look at the top of the slide as we continue. So we'll give everyone a minute to get connected. When you get there, it'll ask you to put in a name, and we should be good to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. So please look at your phones. For the folks on the webinar, now's the time to open browsers or look at phones. And choose whether you're going to do this by web or by text. If there are any issues here with being able to do that, either a bad signal or you don't have your phone or you still use flip phones or whatever, see Ryan over here at this table and we'll get you set up to provide your input. On the webinar, if that's an issue, again, we have people who are just going to be looking at the chatbot to record anything you provide, and we are recording the overall session too. So hopefully we're testing out this approach to see how it works. We're going to see results instantaneously, which is interesting. and we're going to be able to record what you're saying in this fashion. So we'll see how this works, and we'll give you dates. So, everybody all set with their phones in the room? Can we keep going? Okay, let's do that. So, exercise one, we're going to be doing a couple things to get used to this system, and also you're going to be providing us background information about yourselves and your perspectives and your use of different shared mobility services. So hopefully we'll get used to the whole system this way, but we'll also be gathering information that will be helpful to us. So, if you respond and you text and or open the browser, what kind of organization do you represent? Please fill in the organization that best represents who you represent. If you're here not representing any organization, you have a member of the public also. We'll wait a couple minutes. Please also do this on the webinar. Okay, so it looks like it's becoming stable. A lot of public agency staff, not surprising, some NPO staff, some private consultants, a few nonprofits, and a few members of the public. Hello, Kevin. How are you? Why don't you actually sit over here? Do you have a smartphone? Okay, so sit with Ryan, you'll be able to give input through Ryan. You know. I do know. All right, so that's number one. So you're getting a sense of how this works. Let's move on to the next one. What geographic region do you represent? Now, we're not asking you where you live. We're asking you what region you represent. Now, obviously, when we were at the other sessions, we spoke with people who were obviously on Long Island and represented Long Island and also in Hudson Valley. So we expected this session to be a little bit more New York City oriented, but we do have some representations in the webinar and possibly in the room from other parts of the region. Okay, that looks like it's Hudson Valley just shot ahead. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Have you ever used a ride-hailing service like Uber, Lyft, or the equivalent? I like that. Yeah. Not surprisingly, many of you haven't. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Have you ever used a car-sharing service like Zipcar, Getaround, Turo, or the equivalent? Okay. We'll have that. We'll have that. This is what's being presented to you all, but there's background information behind it. So we'll have all that. We'll also know your names, your Visa card number, and you have a DNA sample. Have you ever used, this is the last one on the setup, have you ever used a bike sharing service, City Bike Line, Pace Jump, or equivalent? So as you're doing this, hopefully you're getting used to how the system works. It's pretty easy. They're not all going to be histograms. As you'll see, we're going to be using something called a wall function for some of the answers and something called a word cloud. And that's going to help us look for individual themes and so forth. All right? All right, so let's move on from this to exercise number 2. What is shared mobility? Okay, shared mobility is this term that incorporates so many different things. We don't know quite where to draw the boundaries around this, and we're looking for your expertise and your thoughts about where the boundaries are for shared mobility. So this could be a phrase, it could be a sentence, it could be a couple of words, it could be one word. But what we'd like you to do is enter your definition of shared mobility. What do you regard shared mobility as being? And I believe, Ryan, this is going to come up as a word cloud, right? Well.
Hey, Jerry. For the word cloud, it's best if people don't use spaces between the words.
No, it filters for.
It does filter?
Yeah.
Okay.
So just write it in normally.
Okay.
Obviously, the size of the words in the cloud is going to say something about the frequency that they've been entered. And that's going to give us a little bit of information, we hope, about some overall themes. This is going to be tricky, actually. I do want to point out to everyone also that there's backup information to this also. We're not just getting the word cloud that's being saved, but everything you enter is also being saved. So we'll be able to look at all of that. The word cloud is just an attempt to see what themes are emerging from the words that we're using. So don't worry about losing any information in whatever phrases or sentences you're entering. That will be captured. Just give it a couple more minutes. Not surprisingly, transportation is a big part of this. If it weren't, it would probably be an issue. But we do see words like shared, multiple, this idea of sequential use of modes of transportation, of bicycles or cars or what have you, of rides. Public has come up pretty well here. You see concurrently. There are different types of modes described here, which again, we'll be looking at all that in terms of if you describe it as a particular mode, we want to see the modes that you're including, so we'll look for that. Shared multiple users, not necessarily owners, but users. So the idea is that, you know, you're using mobility, but you're not necessarily owning the means of that mobility. Technology is here, but not as big as we might have anticipated. Technology is part of this. Words like common, pools, access. Now, ownership does appear here, and we're going to look at what people are saying about that ownership in detail when we look at what's behind this. But generally, shared mobility may not involve ownership of the car, the vehicle, the bicycle, whatever. Okay, so this looks like it's calmed down a bit. No, just okay. 2 more minutes, and then we'll go to the next one. If people are entering when we go to the next slide, they'll still be captured, right?
It'll be live until you open up the next poll.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll make sure that we have everything. Interesting word here. Facilitating mobility. So that, you know, the service providers here are facilitating mobility using other people's either vehicles or using vehicles or bicycles that are available for them. Options is pretty good. Okay. So we're going to close this now. We're going to go on to the next part of this. First of all, when we looked at some contextual definitions of what shared mobility might be, it's interesting to compare what you've been thinking about with what we found in some of the definitions. First of all, and these are not mutually exclusive definitions. They're kind of overlapped, which makes it even harder. The Shared Use Mobility Center says that these are transportation services and resources that are shared among users, either concurrently or one after the other. Okay, it's a pretty straightforward definition. There's also mobility management, which we talked about, an approach to designing and delivering transportation services that starts and ends with the customer. That's the National Center for Mobility Management. So that could be specialized transportation services. It could be other types of transportation services. mobility management overlaps with shared mobility. Then you have this thing called mobility on demand. Innovative, user-focused approach which leverages emerging mobility services, integrated transit networks, and operations. So this is kind of like bringing services together in one place so that people can use them, usually through technology, some kind of technological interface. Okay? But again, it overlaps with what could be considered the standard definition of shared mobility. And then finally, you have this concept of mobility as a service, which is similar to mobility on demand, integration of various forms of transport services into a single mobility service accessible on demand. That's the Mobility as a Service Alliance. This third definition is actually from US DOT. So there is a lot of overlap here, and defining the boundaries of these terms is difficult, and there's no one thing that says this is shared mobility and this is everything else. So again, one of the reasons for doing these workshops is to try to find where those boundaries, where those gray areas are. And this next graphic is interesting because this shows some of the services that are involved in shared mobility, some of which are considered to be core or incumbent. They've been around for a while. And they're out there. It's just a question of tying them together better. And then there's some innovative services that are emerging in the shared mobility area. So these are being tied together differently. These are emerging and being tied in. Technology is really playing that role of wrapping these services together. So this is very interesting to look at also because this does involve the emergence of new services that go beyond simply having a smartphone and knowing when your bus is coming. Okay. All right, let's move into the third exercise, an issue scan. Okay, so we're going to be polling again. This will be coming up as a wall, right? So we won't be seeing it as a word cloud. We'll be seeing it as a wall. The question is, what are the top 3 issues, in your opinion, that need to be addressed to support the future development of shared mobility? So we're at a particular place in time right now. We're looking down the road, maybe 10 years. What are those top 3 issues that you feel need to be addressed to support the future development of shared mobility? If you misspell, don't worry about it. We'll know what you mean. So this wall function does not represent size, doesn't indicate the number of times that particular issue has been submitted, but rather we're showing everything. And as you do this, we will be able to also scroll down to show anything that's below the screen. We'll give it a couple more minutes to stabilize. Interestingly, when we did this in the other sections, in a similar way, we had a flip chart, and basically came up with a list of inputs, and then looked for, again, themes. And we need to do that across the board with all this. So whatever we discuss today, we're going to be using this information to identify also common themes. But we can do a similar thing here. This is our electronic flip chart. And there are some things coming up here that seem to be somewhat thematic. For example, you have here, every time I touch it, it moves. Somewhere in there was regulation, and that came up heavily in the other sections. Will there be future regulation? Is future regulation needed? Or more actively, yes, future regulation is needed in this whole area of shared mobility. Equity came up significantly in the other sections too. Whatever these services are going forward, are they being provided equitably? Can everyone use them in an equitable manner? That was a big theme in the other. Being patient is important, particularly in the Long Island session, Rosemary. I think we got responses like, what is shared mobility? And one response was, oh, it's this wonderful technological package, and another response is it's mysterious, and I have no idea what, you know. So communicating all the services that are out there and how people can use them is a very big part of the development of shared mobility, because it's not completely communicated, and it's not being communicated by the service providers because they're competing with one another, and it's probably not being communicated thoroughly by the government agencies either. So there's definitely an information gap that is coming out in all these sessions about shared mobility. Funding came up very importantly, particularly with regard to public subsidy. Will this need to be subsidized as it develops? What is this that needs to be subsidized? That's a big question too. But we are hearing more and more about the financial prospects for service providers like Uber and Lyft, and the fact that they're not profitable and they haven't been profitable. Will they become profitable? These are huge questions. So they build up this, say, for example, if Uber didn't become profitable but built up this huge market and then suddenly disappeared, what would happen at that point? Would public governments step in and maintain it, or something like it? Or would other companies emerge? These are all themes that really came out strongly in the other workshops also. This is really, really important as we're looking down the road at the future of shared mobility. Just want to pick out a couple of others. Behavior change. That's obviously there are generational issues with the technology, where younger generations tend to be more comfortable with using the technology. Boomers like myself and Maura might have a little bit different approach.
Couldn't figure out how to turn the iPad on.
That's why Ryan here, he's a millennial, so that's part of it too, in terms of the ability to use these things. And when you get into specialized transportation services, that becomes a big issue. Services for the aging, services for the disabled. Are these tools usable across all groups? And if they're not, can they be made usable? These are very, very important themes that are emerging. And of course, automation does come up, and I think it's going to come up more strongly in the next question we ask you. But how this interfaces with automation in the future is a huge issue, or will it? And a lot of that has to do with the timetable for the emergence of automation on a large scale. Certainly, from everything that we've seen and read, services where the driver is a cost factor are probably going to be the first services that attempt automation to eliminate that cost factor. That would include goods movement and trucking, but also you're looking at things like taxis and or ride-hailing services, where elimination of the driver could be an important cost factor in the business model. So it's likely that those types of services will be the first that actually begin to be automated. Okay, great. So we're going to call a close to this question in just a minute. I think we're pretty. Yeah. Okay, so I think we'll stop now. Again, all this information is saved and as a backup to this. We'll have a complete database of what you've entered, and we'll be looking at all that in detail. So let's move on to the next question. This is a little different. This is not issues, it's the top 3 actions. Can you hear this right? Oh, I'm sorry. Somebody. What are the top 3 actions that need to be taken for the future development of shared mobility? So wherever it is now, as it develops in the future, tell us what actions would need to be taken. All right, so don't enter the sequence. In other words, enter the 3 different times. If you've got 3 issues, enter 1, then enter the 2nd, and enter the 3rd. That's great. That's called learning how to use the platform. So these are actions now. These are actions that need to be taken by somebody, public governments or others, what have you, as opposed to issues that need to be addressed. Okay, so this is scrolling on the left side.
Yeah, we can change the cluster.
Cluster. There you go. Thank you. this giant mind working. A couple things that are emerging that I'm looking at here, and again, there's some resonance here with what we heard in the other workshops. Legislation, regulation, that came out, that at some point there needs to be more regulation of this shared mobility marketplace. What form that might take is not really known at this point, but it is something that needs to be looked at, and that in addition will address potentially things like equity, and some of these other issues, and potentially, sustainability of these services. The other one that came up here, well, obviously technology. One of the things we heard on Long Island, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, was that there isn't one common source for this information, one common computer source, code, what have you, and that that's important in terms of the service providers providing the information.
Being integrated.
Yes, right. The technology is developing on its own, and different companies are developing different technologies and so forth, and they're finding their sources, whatever they are, for the information that goes in. They may have proprietary algorithms like Uber, but there's no common connection between these things. Only data requirements is sent out. So this may be important as these services develop, probably will be. And the question is that something that's required by legislation, or is there just some technological effort to pull all these things together? Some things will always be proprietary, obviously, but there should be a common core to all these technologies so that they can be optimized, to use the planning term. So technology comes up, open data comes up. This came up also on the other two, allocation of limited space. I think that's allocation of limited space on the streets. So it's very much associated with complete streets. It's also, priority lanes for transit, priority lanes for carpools, all these different types of things that have been around for many, many years. Get amplified a bit when we start to talk about shared mobility and things like ride-hailing and so forth. Certainly, this addresses, or this is relevant to things like gathering points, parking, access points at things like airports and events and so forth, where you have massive numbers of vehicles coming to pick up other people, and you have to manage all that. And is it making it better or worse? That comes into it also. Policy coordination, that's important. It's related to legislation, but it certainly becomes important in terms of public policy as it relates to these various things. We see it in our region, where ride-hailing is treated one way in New York City, in different ways outside of New York City, different ways in different states. Certainly automation is developing that way. Different states are developing their own legislation, their own regulations with regard to automation. With there's something happening at the federal level, but it's not placed yet. So a piecemeal approach in a multi-state region like ours is not ideal in many cases. Subsidies, again, figure out subsidies. Good point, but it would seem that many people feel that there will be a need for some level of subsidization, whether it be incentives for providing certain services, like, for example, first and last mile services to transit, where there might be a subsidy for the service provider, both to keep the cost low and also to incent the provider to provide the service. So that's one form of subsidy that's kind of based on markets. There's more general subsidies and so forth. Awareness is really important. How, again, do we have a common message or a common information portal for all these different things? I just read something within the last month about a software program that's being developed. I can't recall where, but basically brings together all these different apps into one grand mobility portal. That may be very important, and I'm not sure that that's being developed by the government. I think it's being developed in the public sector, private sector, regardless, it may exist, and how to bring the awareness of everyone up to the same level is important, and that also begins to talk about equity considerations also. Coalition building is interesting. Can we scroll down to see if there are any words? Research, okay. Advantage shared mobility over other modes. So this talks about not only sharing space, say on streets, but also premium space. Premium space for pickups, premium space for tolling potentially, or premium policies, premium space on roadways for certain types of service that benefit the public at large. Is there anything else? Yeah, there's more. Get rid of free parking, okay? ITS framework for priority. So there is an ITS framework out there that's mostly in the public sector, and how does that hook into this new technology? Does it? Should it? Yes. The answer is probably yes. But that all goes to optimizing these services. And one more down, Jesse. Okay. Some pricing issues, education, of course, outreach, all very important. Curbside management is a theme that definitely becomes more important with these. We're seeing it already at airports and at sporting events and so forth, where you know, everybody's Uber shows up at the same time, and you have 10,000 cars waiting for 10,000 people or whatever. And special provisions are being made for that. The operation at LaGuardia is pretty amazing. I think they're both your airports, right? Yeah. And these are things that weren't there like 5 years ago. Yeah. So, you know, curbside management, it all goes into also how do you manage the space on the street, because curbside is part of the street too. So, even if it's a parking lot. Okay. Great. So thank you again for this input. We're going to move on, I think, to our next. Okay. Exercise 4. The future of shared mobility. So now we're looking again down the road more. We've identified issues. We've identified actions that would need to be taken. The development of shared mobility. Now let's talk about shared mobility's future. So, again, going to your suggestion to enter this one at a time. What top 3 roles can we fill that? Yeah, what top 3 roles should shared mobility have in a future transportation system? Okay. So if you had your king or queen of the world, and you could assign roles to shared mobility based on what's out there already in the transportation system, what would the top 3 roles be? This is going to come up as a word cloud, and again, we'll have the backup, but we want to see what comes in terms of the frequency of certain words. Right, and this is certainly the quietest workshop we've ever done. As you do this, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the research. There's a little bit of research done about how, for example, ride hailing has affected transportation systems. The research that's been done that we've seen, and not a lot has been done, has shown that in urban core areas, ride hailing may be adding to BMT and diminishing transit service. Okay, but in more suburban areas where commuter rail is present, there's a positive effect between ride-hailing, at least as far as what we've seen so far, between ride-hailing and transit service on commuter rail. So it's playing more of a first mile, last mile role. But there hasn't been a lot of research done on it up to this point, and some of that research was done by Sam Schwartz here in this region.
Jerry, could you speak a little bit louder or maybe come to the center so
Sure.
So we can pick everything up that you're saying?
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought it was amplified, but maybe not enough. So, you know, that's part of this too in terms of future roles. They may be different in different places. It's not one size fits all. And
Could you repeat that, commuter? You talked about the study about,
So
yeah.
in suburban areas, it would seem that ride-hailing services like Uber and Lyft are having a positive effect on, somewhat positive effect on commuter rail ridership. So those services are being used, I guess, more in a first mile, last mile type of arrangement.
In rich communities.
Well, suburban.
Yeah.
They're not all rich.
Yeah, upper class.
Well, depends. It didn't get that fine in terms of the research. But in the urban areas, it would seem that the opposite was true, that it was adding more VMT, vehicle miles of travel, reducing transit ridership. And what do we see here? We do see first and last mile coming up here pretty strongly in terms of the role. Again, you're putting in phrases, so these words that are coming up are not completely a reflection of what you're putting in, but the fact that mile is very prominent. The words first and or last are rather prominent. Transit is rather prominent. I'm assuming that is indicating that many of you feel that a role in support of transit for shared mobility is an important role going into the future. Accessibility comes up. That can be accessibility to transit. It can also be accessibility to activities like medical, employment, so forth, social services. Occupancy comes up also, assuming that means, and we'll check this in detail, but assuming that that's indicating increasing vehicle occupancies, increasing use of public transit, reducing the amount of single occupant vehicles. Reliability, I guess one of the reasons why people do shift to shared ride modes is because they seems more reliable in terms of having a ride when you need it, going to a location that you want to go to, and then being able to return from that location. So reliability is seemingly tied into why market shares are so big for some of these services. Okay, again, we thought that using the word cloud here would be somewhat indicative of themes, but we have everything you're entering back behind this, and we'll be able to go through that in detail as we scope out the results of these workshops and share that back to the Metropolitan Mobility Network and the NYMTC members, as well as the members of the MAP forum, in terms of what we're finding with this research. Oh, you were just, okay. All right, I think we're almost done with this one. Looks that way. Let's move on to the next. Exercise 5. So this is where your perceptions can help us in terms of, there's not much out there in terms of actual quantification of how quickly these things are going to happen. There are various adoption models that we're looking at, adoption curves, but it's really difficult to apply this to technologies that are just emerging now. But hopefully your perceptions will help us to see what you're thinking about with regard to how quickly this will develop. So first of all, this is a straight multiple choice. How quickly can we expect shared mobility to develop in your view? So please enter here. Pretty simple. Ed.
I know you're not going to change it, but you give it like it's either fully developed and you go 5 to 7 years. You shouldn't have partially developed. That's another alternative.
Okay. Well, I'll take that under.
No, I bet you will. I have no question. No doubt.
Well, we want to see how many people feel that it's not going to develop at all.
No, that's okay. I just let you. Okay.
Because it is developed. Yeah, I suppose there's still more development to happen. Well,
exactly.
Clearly, you're looking at this intermediate range. Probably we should have offered a 0 to 5 too, but we didn't.
That's right.
You're looking at something in the medium term, as opposed to it's already developed or it's going to be much longer.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I probably
Okay.
like that.
Looks like this is pretty much done. So that's part 1 to this. Let's move on to part 2. How do you think shared mobility will change in the future? This is a wall. I believe this is a wall, right? Well, we'll see.
Oh, this is.
So this is
how do you think it'll?
cluster.
Yeah, make it a cluster.
Great.
Like a a while better.
So again, how do you think shared mobility will change in the future? This is important feedback for us in terms of looking at not only it will change, but in what fashion, what people think will emerge in terms of shared mobility. We know what we've seen in the research we've looked at, what's been written about these different new mobility, but we'd like to hear what you think also. Yes, sir. We'll try that, but I think one of the issues with that is, again, we have the webinar situation. And are we getting anything on the chat box, by the way? Okay. Okay. So we're addressing those. So one of the issues is, again, how to tie this together with the people who are not actually in the room. So we can hear from people in the room, but then we're not hearing from the 20 people who are observing remotely. So we kind of de-emphasize that to see how it works. But this is the first time, and we can always learn more in the future. We're certainly going to be using this technology. One of our challenges is we have, even though we're only part of the multi-state region, we have a rather large planning area. So it's always difficult to provide access to our meetings. Even when we travel, we were in Southern Community College, which is accessible to some on Long Island, but Long Island is a Long Island, you know. It's always a challenge to try to give enough access for people. So one of the things that's jumping out here, people see a growth in the adoption rates, so that more and more people will be making use of these services, and that will go rapidly with the generation change. That generations coming on, not only millennials, but I guess it's called Generation Z now, who are, who the technology is second nature to, will create even greater adoption rates. Automation comes up here several times. Automated vehicles become the norm. And the issue of ownership, no more independently owned vehicles. So one of the models in the future that's out there is that, vehicle ownership will become, will go away. It'll become irrelevant. Rather, there'll be mobility that people can access mobility. One of my favorite things that I've read in that regard is that in the future, you'll get on your app, you'll select a trip, an automated vehicle will show up at your front door, you'll get in, it'll take you where you want to go. And there may or may not be other people on that trip with you. And similarly, you'll do the same thing coming back. So that you're not going to need to own a car or any kind of vehicle. And it'll be completely automated. Now that's a kind of a utopian vision, but some people feel that that's relevant. Whether that happens or how quickly it happens is a huge question. So there's also an indication that the services will not only expand in terms of uses, but also reach. That they'll be available to more places. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Oh, that is a lot. So what I want to do is just ask, first of all, we did this in an hour, which is great. We could easily spend much more time on this, but I do want to ask people for their perceptions of this approach, and then I do want to open it up a bit to see if there's anything about what's been said that people want to emphasize or ask questions about. Let me do this with the mobile mic, and Jan wants to go first. 5 seconds. There we go.
Jerry, before we ask the perceptions, I just would like some feedback from the members who are here on the webinar. In terms of the actions, ultimately, where this is leading us, shared mobility is not going to develop unless we invest, do some sort of investment, and that's ultimately where we want to get with the regional transportation plan and what we're doing here. So I'd like to find out from the members, in terms of the actions, I did see some things like infrastructure investment and other forms of investment. Where do you feel we should be spending some of the funding that we have in the near and in the long term to get or to implement this shared mobility, to implement shared mobility. So I'd like to have some discussion on that if possible.
So we'll, Maura will run the microphone around. Any thoughts on that, on Jay's question? Jim?
I go to the Sunnyside Rail Yard development meeting, and it's an all-new housing development that they're coming in with new train lines, new car sharing. So what I'm saying is any future development, you should be a part of that. I even told them to talk to you from EDC. It's 340 acres total. There's going to be 7 train stations, Long Island Railroad, New Jersey Transit, hopefully the Rockaway Beach Line, and a few other things. 7 or 8 train lines don't need that development. And shared mobility will be big there, that's all.
So you feel that some investment will be happening through the development itself?
Right, so, but they're discussing on how it should be done. You know, you're not going to get this is a perfect example that's coming in right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we have 3 comments. One is we might want to distinguish between TNCs as ride-hailing, sharing of bikes, scooters, personal vehicles, and future AVs that could be privately owned and used versus put to true shared use.
Okay. So that's all 3?
That's one comment. And then the other one is, I can't emphasize accessibility to technology and mobility devices enough. And then the third comment is, peak scale would like to be part of the regional planning. We hope to get a grant to build a new pier, which could accept ships and maybe ferries.
Okay, so that's a request for funding. Okay, that's good. There's one suggestion on investment. Okay, you got something? Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's a way in which this will make suburban or really remote areas need to get urbanized in a really quick fashion. Like you can provide bicycles or scooters to a place like Poughkeepsie or, somewhere that's quite far out from New York City, but they're not going to be able, people will not feel safe unless it gets bike lanes and those streets get completed. So we're going to have to think of, the context of, yes, these things can do last mile, but only if that last mile is safe in the suburban context. So.
Interesting. Here, Bill.
Sit down. I think they initially, there are, I got this right?
Hold it up to your brother.
Yeah, is it okay? Okay now?
Good.
Okay, good, all right. Okay. There are share ride places right now in New York, and I think, they have to be cleaned up and made to work and made to be attractive. I go back and forth, once or twice a month from Michigan to New York. I go through LaGuardia Airport, and even though it's a big hub, there's lots of shared mobility. It's terrible. It's terrible. Anyone who's taken the M60 or waited for the M60, which is an outstanding service. It's cheap. It hits a number of places in Manhattan. It's an ordeal. It's an absolute ordeal. On the other hand, I get on the plane in Detroit, but I get on like in Ann Arbor, and essentially what would be, it's really a commuter. It's a suburban area. That area. They're already developing kind of shared mobility services. For example, in Ann Arbor, it's a big medical center. There are 3 very large hospitals, and people, of course, settled, really basically using the automobile, kind of, they drive to work. So instead of having them drive to the hospital where they would, and build new parking lots, they have ride stations where people can park their car and get on a bus, for example. And I think that's a good example of shared mobility. And another, even a larger sense of shared mobility is that large numbers of people do go from, and I'm sorry, I have to use maybe people aren't familiar with, but some of the largest cities in southeast Michigan, Lansing, the state capital, a large suburban community called Brighton, Ann Arbor is one of them. And over the last 2 years, they've developed a bus service that is actually crowded. I get on the bus at 3:55 in the morning, and I have to look for a seat. So there's this, there's a sort of like you're going to a hub. Obviously, the airport is a hub, but the sources are also kind of what you might call minor hubs. So these are kind of like either developing, but I think I go back to New York, that whatever agency takes the responsibility for the initial leads. I mean, there are existing shared services that could really be polished up, made better, and used as an example of how this works.
So I want to take one point, and Jessica, in the notes that you're taking, I think the point you made about cleaning up or polishing the mobility centers where we're seeing this activity in the short term is really important. So you can put that in your notes. And the other thing I want to take something you said combined with something you said, in that creating these sort of mobility centers, which is another term that's been out there, where all these different services are available, would help to rationalize. Like, for example, you mentioned the bus route that was put in because of all this demand that was being generated. I understand it's at an airport, so it's a little different, but looking at that going forward makes some sense also.
If you think about it, taxi cabs, Uber and Lyft, drop off and pick up completely illegally on a bus stop or from a fire hydrant. So if we go to shared mobility, right, or autonomous cars, they're going to have to park it legally. So you're going to have to take away parking spaces, which people are just not going to go for. You're going to have designated areas on almost every street of where you park those cars. Because a car that is programmed is not going to stop illegally.
Of course, if no one owns cars anymore, that's a different question, but when that happens is the issue. So that, again, we go back to curb management and designation of places along the curb where these pickups and drop-offs could happen. That'd be good.
In terms of investment, I think you'll get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of bike infrastructure, because I think a lot of these users, some of them are, they may not be as comfortable riding some of these modes. I mean, in Chicago, there's a massive scooter pilot that was a big success, but a major issue that kept coming up was people who normally didn't use these modes to ride them on the sidewalk or in otherwise, sort of disruptive ways, and people were very put off by that. So I think creating a, safer and more inviting environment for, these kinds of users, not just, your everyday bicyclists, but more, older users or more incidental users would really go a long way to promote these technologies.
So let me ask a follow-up to that, which is, in New York City with the docked bikes, of course, there was the docking stations became part of the competition for curbside. But there have also been dockless bikes, not only in New York City, but in surrounding communities, where the dockless bikes end up all over the place. And in some cities, it's become endemic. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of how it fits into the curbside management issue?
That's a good question. I personally prefer the docked. I think it's I'm a creature of habit, and I think you'll get a lot more commuters that way. People like the reliability of it. They like the fixed nature of it. I think you can plan around it much better. It's nice to have the sort of serendipitous, bikes anywhere you want, but in terms of actually being a reliable, mode of transportation, I think the docked fact, it's just the way to go.
Thank you, President. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. I don't know. Other thoughts about the investment? Rosemary, right behind you.
Yeah, I would echo the bike infrastructure, and I think there can be kind of a private-public cooperation there where maybe there's private models, but City Bike or out on Long Island, Thatcher, whatever that can provide the shared bikes. But without the public piece of developing the infrastructure, it'll be limited in terms of its ability to use it as first mile, last mile.
And generally, do you see a public role for funding sort of generally in the area of shared mobility, or just with bikes?
I think that where there's a business model that somebody can make money on it and can tap into the venture capital money and that stuff, you should absolutely let that go. The public doesn't have to do it all, but there's certain things that are just pure infrastructure, whether it's bike lanes or things that tap into government-controlled resources like the curb or whatever that the private side isn't going to be able to do. So if the public side can help to enable it, then you'll get more private investment, I think.
Yeah, maybe not so popular suggestion for where the money should go, but I think we need to take the guesswork out of the equation and put some money into an evaluation framework. If you provide investment for a pilot, it should be evaluated, ideally in a common way across all the pilots.
Right, across every. Excellent suggestion. Sir?
Jerry, if you would, chat.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, we have one comment on the chat room. It says DOT needs to announce PSA, P grants, and TAP grants.
Okay. That would help, yes. You hear that, DOT folks? Okay.
I serve an area that's in eastern Queens, and they call it sort of a transportation desert. And I think that our government should look at specific areas where it's not really served by mass transit. And this sort of ride-sharing thing could come in. Now, it already happens with these illegal cabs where they come and they go up and down the major thoroughfares. But if there's something where they're, better insured, they're not just out there, people just working, I think that's a good investment, or at least a way to look at it.
And there's an interesting case study of that on the east end of Long Island right now, where both pedicabs and I'm not sure it's car sharing, but it's certainly ride hailing, have emerged on the east end because you have new transit services, say for weekends on the South Fork, but you still got to get from the transit station to wherever you are. And these things are emerging right now, and they're private. So government has played a role in the sense of emphasizing the need and improving the transit service, but then these private services are emerging to supplement. Any other thoughts on Jan's question about investment? Anything over here? Go ahead.
In southwestern Connecticut, we've repeatedly heard from shared mobility vendors that varying ordinances and the procurement process, whether it be permitted or RFP, as well as preference for scooters versus bikes, impacts their interest in diving into new markets.
That's a good point. So what government does can really affect the venture capital you talked about. There's also, and we're going to be having probably in January a separate session from our safety advisory working group on micromobility and safety, because there are a lot of issues with micromobility. Can you use a scooter in a bike lane? Can you use a scooter on a sidewalk? If you do, what happens? How many people do you run over or whatever? Where pedestrians, bicycles, and scooters interface. Huge issues, and that's the non-motorized. Well,
e-bikes.
E-scooters are sort of non-motorized, right? But the more these micro-mobility options develop, then it becomes a question of sharing the space amongst pedestrians, scooters, bicycles, and it's related to the street, but it's not the whole street. So big issues there, and again, we're going to be trying to do that session sometime, probably similar to this in January. Input into our next one. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, if I might just for a second. I think that especially the initial, share riding, share mobility examples have to make sense to people who, not just those who use it, but the people who watch it, those who are affected. Dedicated bike paths are a good example of that. A lot of them, people see that, part of the streets cut off, dedicated, There are poles, sometimes these green pads, and then they don't see bikes. It's like the light rail is like that too. I mean, you go anywhere in the country, you look, especially you look out sometimes, and all you see are empty cars, light rail cars roaming around, and people say, well, what's the purpose of that? I mean, I think somewhere there has to be a kick-in, or the route has to be good. It has to have a sort of a density to it. So if you're standing on a corner of 43rd Street and 2nd Avenue, and you're looking a block up to see if there's a bike coming, as opposed to seeing 50 bikes coming. Well, if you see 50 bikes coming, well, you know it's working. It's also going to motivate the police to watch the behavior of the bike, the cyclists, which they don't do it when there's just one or two people coming down. So that's just a thought that I have. And I mean, I might just say that there are, I just add, it might not be relevant to the structure here, but, if you're looking for hubs, I mean, you take, for example, First Avenue between roughly 34th Street and 23rd Street, it's one hospital after another. Big employers, different kinds of employment, lots of people coming and going. With, especially with the hospitals, maybe that might be a place, to develop a kind of a demonstration.
A similar thing is happening in 125th Street by the pier. So Columbia is developing all these buildings that are going to be drawing people in to work there, students and so forth. That might be another area where a mobility center.
This is sort of partly a question, but it always seems to be so much the space on the streets, and it's a kind of mobility is taken up by small vans and maintenance trucks that come in, people who live in the outer boroughs, carpenters, plumbers, keep the apartment buildings, going in Manhattan. In some ways, they're kind of like sort of conquer that in some way. I think, I may be mistaken, I think Verizon has a system where they have kind of like a mother truck, I guess, a sort of that has the maintenance people work out, they store their equipment, in that truck, and it sort of has a route. So they basically take the subway, to work, go to wherever this truck is.
That's interesting. I know that the city DOT folks, some of whom are in the room, have been looking at technology as a way to manage those deliveries too. So, but that's a whole other topic.
Right. I wasn't sure where it fit, but
it fits. But we can do a workshop just on that, I think. But thanks for bringing that up. Okay. Anything else with regard to Jan's question? Because I then want to ask you about your perceptions of this platform and what we did today. Any other thoughts? Okay, so how was this? This is the first time we've done something fully automated like this, and again, trying to pull in people from outside the room meaningfully into a conversation like this. And it was interesting, the suggestion was made to have a discussion afterwards, because that was good and it was very meaningful. So we'll bring it up.
I think we lost some of the benefit of being in a room together, because we were just reading off of the screen. In some ways, this format maybe shouldn't be in person at all. You should only be participating remotely, or we try and have people. We have to have some way of people reading out what they're saying, so that a definition doesn't just stay static, but people say, I like that aspect of your definition, I want to add to it. I liked better when we were seeing whole answers as opposed to the word clouds, particularly when it was a definition, because the independent words in the word cloud don't make sense outside of the sentence that they're in.
Right.
And I think if we just have to think about if we're doing something electronic like this, it's very useful for collecting data, but do we still, if we're in a room together, we should potentially be talking face to face as opposed to just reading what's on the screen.
That's a fine balance. It's a great observation, and it's a fine balance point. In our original version of this session, which was going to be completely in person, We actually had, working with writing down things on cards and then organizing them in tables and so forth, much more interactive in person. We had to adapt that and try to have the technology serve some of that purpose. Just observing it myself, it serves some of the purpose, but not all of it. There's still, and so we have to balance the need to have in-person discussions with the need to provide as much access as possible. So it's a great point. I don't know how we're going to do it, but Deb and I and others. So, go ahead.
Jerry, I agree with everything this gentleman said. I would just add, I did like the fact that we were able to see results as we went. That was kind of a neat thing. But there are some issues that he brought up, and he's right. So.
Okay. It is possible, just thinking about that, and we'll go here, but thinking about that, we might have a broad session followed by an in-person session. Yeah, and see what that does, together.
Hi. The flip side of that I thought was a little bit distracting to see all the answers popping up in real time. And for some, I maybe gave one answer instead of three because I wanted to be paying attention to what I was screening out and typing up an answer. And then my answers were swayed by what I was seeing on the screen at the time. That said, I do like the format in that it really encourages everyone to participate, where, you always have quiet people or shy people, so really you get input from everyone, but maybe you could do one question, process those answers, and then, or one response, process that, maybe come up with a more, something that represents kind of a group response, maybe, and then move on to the next.
Interesting point. And there's always an issue in any kind of group setting about how we set up the room. Some people are not going to be comfortable getting up and saying again, and so that does help with that. It does help with that.
Actually, I like the format. I thought it did encourage more participation in the idea that we're collecting all of the responses. I'd be really interested to see those responses if you could share them, and if they're broken out amongst, say, in-city planning agencies versus the regional planning agencies. Because we're always interested how our partners are experiencing and what they're thinking about options versus not group everyone, but it's really helpful to understand how different people are experiencing the same movement of shared mobility and what their issues are versus what our issues are and how it can be worked out.
Interesting point. I want to go back to Bill. And then we got chat room. Okay. We're almost done, folks.
My thoughts are closer to the last gentleman. I kind of like it because it's clean, and while I was watching all these different ideas pop up, I said, boy, there are a lot of ideas, and that means there are a lot of people with different ideas, and if you had the traditional kind of meeting that we're used to, I mean, all that would get kind of clogged up. It's really, this way you get kind of to see the trees in a kind of a clean way, and then if you had follow-ups, follow-up meetings, especially if the same group got together or wanted to keep getting together, I think naturally it would sort of, sort out, the practical issues, the important issues, and it would take care of itself. But I except for the mechanics, that's another story. That's an age story, I think, more than anything. But the idea of that coming up like that, I thought it was really clean. I just kind of, because you have to say, hey, there's a lot of ideas here, a lot of ways to do it. There are a lot of people in this room with a lot of different ideas. And it would take you a month to really sort them out.
And we'll talk at the end about next steps, because I think the point you made about coming back together again, so how this is going to be processed, that's a really important point. Catherine?
And then we have 3 comments, 4 now. So it would be nice to speak via webinar, and then kudos for doing this. Oh, so this is the second comment. Kudos for doing this. We need more of these types of forums. Thanks again. And then the third comment is great to have interactive webinar. I had hoped to attend in person, but weather made that impossible. I would have preferred to be there, but this is a very good second choice. And then fourth comment, these interactive displays can be very useful to gather a lot of nuggets quickly, as has been said. Given the size of the New York, New Jersey region, today's meeting had good overall turnout and input.
Great. Thank you for the kudos and good points all. I do think on the webinars, what we've seen, and we do all our meetings with a webinar accompaniment, just about all our meetings, including business meetings, is that when you open up all the lines, managing everybody, if you have 20 or 30 people on the line, is really difficult, and you get voiceover, people speaking over each other, and noise, and all kinds of stuff. So we've gone more to the chatbot recently, which isn't ideal. There is still an advantage to being in the room. You know, we can't make it completely equitable. So we encourage people to come to the room, but then, you know, we want to give as much access as possible to people remotely, too. So let me talk a little bit, because we got, I'm sorry.
One point is, if you're using your phone, if you're using your phone to enter different comments, you're not checking your email. So you're right. Everybody here was participating. No one was sitting here.
Everybody stayed on the phone.
I would check my
But I do miss Jerry with his magic marker on there. Everybody here was participating, and they weren't checking their email.
So like everything, nothing's perfect, and there are pluses and minuses to the way we did this. And not all sessions can be done this way. I mean, this is kind of a very general session, a real exploration. Okay, you can do that, but we have much more focused sessions too, and I'm not sure you could use this for those. So we're learning, and we'll continue to learn from this. Let me just say a little, oh, go ahead, more.
I was just wondering how these results were going to be shared. Or they're going to be
Yes, I was about to say that. So next steps. So we have the output that we gathered from the other two sessions that I spoke about, which were completely in person, but only limited to an hour, plus whatever we have here on the computer and then the notes, and we recorded the whole session. Our job is to go back and to process all that. We have to sort of present that back to the Metropolitan Mobility Network. Ultimately, the intention is certainly to advise NYMTC's next plan, which will be adopted in 2021. There'll be a section there about shared mobility that's more than we have now in our current plan. And as Jan was pointing out, that will hopefully lead to, you know, discussions amongst our members of policies and funding and so forth. We hope that the other MAP4 members will similarly use this result and possibly do these workshops in their areas also. But we have to really play this back with the Metropolitan Mobility Network. And our next meeting will probably be in the spring, probably in a March, April timeframe. So that's our challenge, is to make sense of everything we've heard, play it back at that meeting, which will be a public meeting, but it'll be more like a business meeting with an agenda as opposed to a workshop. And then from that, go to the next step and write that into our next plan. So it's not just a planning result. Hopefully it'll be a programming and funding result eventually. And NYMTC's members will determine that, because they are the council. So. Okay, so, you know, everything you've done today, everything you've given us is not lost. It's hopefully going to be used very positively. And we really appreciate your time and your willingness to serve as guinea pigs for this approach. So thank you for that. And you're on our list now, so certainly you'll know when that subgroup meeting comes up in the spring. So, thank you all for your time today. Yes, we have a brown bag presentation coming up at 12 in this room.
12:30.
12:30. Okay, 12:30. It'll be on trade rail. Thank you all.
Yeah, yeah.